Welcome, everybody. We're glad to have you here today. Please feel free to share your name and where you're from in the chat. We'd love to learn about everybody who is in this Zoom room. I see some what I will call returners, people that have been here on multiple different occasions. So we're really glad to have you again and again. My name is Diana Laraco, and I will be starting this in just about a minute. We'll give just a few more minutes to let people come in. There's still a few people coming into the room. And again, please feel free to use the chat and let us know where you're from and who you are. We're excited. This is our fourth webinar, 9 and 9 Overtime, UDL 3.0 for 2025. We are rolling right into 2026 with this series. So we're very, very excited. We had great reception from our presenters, and we're really grateful for their contributions to what we hope are webinars that people will go back and use again and again. They are posted on YouTube, and I know that my colleague Rob Legary is going to be putting those links in the chat. So please look at the chat and grab the links. And I am going to go ahead and get going. And so again, I'm Diana Laraco. I'm at Goodwin University in East Hartford, Connecticut in the US. And this is, again, our fourth in the 2025 series, 9 and 9 Overtime, UDL 3.0. We are incredibly fortunate today to have with us Sarah Silverman, who happens to also work beyond all the wonderful things that she does. She also happens to adjunct at Goodwin University, so it's one of our own, and we're just delighted to have her here. She is going to talk about UDL design options for interaction, that guideline, which is under the action and expression principle in the Universal Design for Learning framework. Let me just take a minute to introduce Sarah, and I know she has an introductory slide, so she'll do a bit more. But Sarah is an independent faculty developer who focuses on neurodiversity, disability studies, and inclusive instructional design. She writes a great Substack newsletter. If you haven't subscribed to it, you must do so, Beyond the Scope. And as I said before, she's an adjunct in our human service program here at Goodwin University in East Hartford, Connecticut in the US. So, Sarah, I am going to stop my screen sharing and let you take it over from here. And please, everyone, continue to use the chat. We'll be monitoring that.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, my face got a little obscured, I think, here. I'm just putting in the chat the links to the materials I'll be using before I start sharing my screen. You will not be able to see them if you just came into the room, so I'll ask Rob if it's possible to continue to reshare those as appropriate. Okay. I'm so grateful to the Goodwin folks for inviting me. Thank you so much. Before I get started with the actual workshop and presentation, I just want to make sure everyone is oriented to the materials. So you have the link now for these slides. Rob just shared those, which is great. There's also what I'm showing on the screen now is a Word document. It's just a small handout, and I just want to alert you to a few reasons you may want this. One, it has a link to the slides and this document as well. That could be good if you want to refer back to them at any given time. It also has my contact information, ways you can get in touch with me. As you'll hear in a second, I like to say that I've planned for maximum accessibility, but I know that the live workshop is not everybody's favorite format. Also, some of you may be watching this after the fact on YouTube, so I want to encourage you to get in touch with me if there's anything that you'd like to continue to discuss. Also, on this document, you have a short agenda and outline of where we're going to be going today, as well as the references and additional resources to everything that I will refer to today. So that's everything that I hope that you're going to need. With that, I will start the presentation. This is called Designing Options for Interaction, Accessible Design Instead of Retrofitting. The QR code that is available right there is going to be for Slido. That is the polling tool that I'm going to be using. I'll tell you more about that in a second. If you would like to open it now, you can. You'll have another opportunity soon. Thanks so much for coming today, and I'm very excited to learn with you. The slides that I'm using are available at, I didn't get a chance to put it on the slide, but it's in the chat right now. And the handout is available at tinyurl.com/9in9-handout. Feel free to turn on the captions if that's something that will help you today. And also feel free to use your time and space however you want. Camera on or off is fine. Moving around your space is also fine with me. I recognize that a webinar might not be the best learning mode for everyone. I encourage you to use the slides and handout after the program today and follow up with me if you would like to. Because people all have different learning needs, I think of this as just one part of the learning that you may do with this content. You may choose to explore it on your own after. You may choose to return to the recording at another time. Those are all great ways of engaging with this content. Ways to express yourself and communicate today. One option is going to be the Zoom chat. You can use that throughout, and I will attempt to monitor it to the greatest extent that I can. Rob, Diana, and Paula will probably have to help me. We'll also have Slido polls, which is something you can probably use text or emoji if you're using a mobile device. You can also plan to raise your hand and speak at designated times, probably based on the number of people here. That designated time will be towards the end of the session at a time for questions. Also contacting me after the session. I also 100% recognize that not all of your participation and engagement will be directly visible to me, and that's okay. All of these methods of participation are invitations, not expectations or demands on you. You're 100% free to just listen to and watch what's going on today, if that's what works for you. Now, what you may find interesting about this session. I always like to do this because one of the most important concepts in UDL we get is that students are not all motivated by the same things. And that is true of all of you today here as well. So I came up with a few ideas, and you could probably tell me why you're interested in this topic as well, beyond what I've suggested here. One could be you're interested in the content, UDL, accessible design, and inclusion in some respect. You may also be interested in some theoretical and disability studies-based motivations for UDL. I view this as the main idea that I'm going to talk about today, which is many of us are quite skilled in implementing various aspects of universal design, but many of us also are attempting to motivate and inspire and encourage other people to use UDL. A lot of what I'll talk about today are some reasons that the various people might want to do that. And I hope that that's something you can take forward. You might share similar information to this presentation. I don't have a monopoly on ideas about UDL. You probably have many similar ideas, but you might just want to see how I do it. And maybe that will be something that is helpful for you going forward. You may also have other interests and motivations that I don't know about, but if you'd like to share them at any point during this session in the chat, I'd be very open to that as well. We're not going to do any polls yet, but I just want to offer that you can use the QR code here or go to slido.com and enter the number 3499321. We won't use this polling system for every single question that I ask, but it will be used for some of them. Full transparency, that is because you have to pay to ask more questions, and I didn't do that. To my knowledge, this polling system can be used with keyboard navigation instead of mouse navigation. It can be used on Apple and Android devices. If for any reason this is not working for you, please feel free to use the chat as well to add your responses, and I'll monitor that. So here's the things that I hope that we can do today. One, we will consider the distinction between retrofitting, which we'll define, and accessible design. We will recognize some connections between the UDL guidelines and new upcoming ADA rules for digital accessibility. name and explain the function of several assistive technologies. And then we'll also compare and contrast the ideas that come from the UDL guidelines of offering various options, varying, and honoring different ways of interacting with instruction materials, environments, and peers. Now, a little bit about me. My name's Sarah. As you know, I use the she, her pronouns. Description, a white woman with shoulder length brown hair. Today I am wearing a black t-shirt. I just wrote that. You don't wear an exciting outfit every day, but it's just worth saying what is shown on the screen. I wear a lot of figurative hats. I teach disability studies. I do instructional design and faculty development, and I offer various types of consulting in higher education. Much of that consulting relates to disability, accessibility, and neurodiversity, and which is an important topic to me personally, as I have a disability and I am neurodivergent. And I would say I have been a UDL practitioner pretty much since I started teaching. I guess I mentioned that today because I'm very interested in how people get interested and motivated in the practice of UDL itself. For me, it's one of those things that instantly clicked. From really the moment I heard about UDL, I recognized its relevance to me as a teacher. However, I know that a lot of people don't have that experience. And that's why I have tried to invest a lot of my teaching time and research and writing in finding different motivations that help people get invested in UDL. So today you'll see a little bit about that. Now, I would love to learn a little bit more about you. Some of you people are I know well, and others I'm meeting for the first time today. So we're going to use the Slido poll. Please use it to tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you physically right now, and what brought you to the session today? You might refer to some of those motivations I mentioned earlier or different ones. So you can use the QR code that is here now. Or go to slido.com and enter the number 3499321. Some people already did introduce themselves, so this is also a bit of a proof of concept of making sure the polling thing is working. Some people are at home in the office. Hickory, North Carolina, a place I've never been, by the way, Lillian. I would really love to. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that I am physically in New Haven, Connecticut. Vermont, West Virginia, Washington State, another in Pennsylvania. All wonderful. I just thought I'd comment on one thing. There's one thing that's different about this activity than from when people casually introduce themselves, which is that this one is anonymous. So sometimes I just like to notice the differences and what people might want to or be willing to share in an anonymous versus named context. I'm not sure if anybody did share something differently in this particular activity, but I'm definitely getting new and interesting information from it. So thank you for participating. And you may be able to see at the top that there's a little tally of different things that people are mentioning in their responses, almost like a mini coding of these responses. So that's something that's kind of useful about Slido. Okay, Wonderful. So it's great to see that we have also some representation from other from countries that are not the United States. One thing I do want to mention, since there are people who are not from the United States here, is I am going to be talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act and the some changes that are upcoming in the implementation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is a piece of law that only applies in the United States. And so to the extent that this may not apply in your specific teaching context, I hope that you'll at least be able to apply some of what we learn from the new rules and how they might be applied in the classroom. And I just want to make sure that I'm not glossing over the fact that not everybody here is in the United States. Okay, so I want to just note where we are in the guidelines, what we are specifically talking about in this session. So you on the screen is a picture of the UDL guidelines chart, but without the specific considerations taken put in there. And there's a box around design options for interaction. And as Diana said at the beginning, this is part of the action and expression category. This is part of how students demonstrate their knowledge, interact with materials, and interact with their peers. Sometimes I like to just show this diagram without the numbered considerations under it, because I think sometimes it can help provide a visual of the different foci within the guidelines. That's where we are. But the considerations that are part of this are 4.1, vary and honor the methods for response, navigation, and movement. And 4.2, optimize access to accessible materials and assistive and accessible technologies and tools. And so the kind of introductory word I want to say here is these terms are pretty new in the 3.0 guidelines, vary and honor. So I want part of our session to be filling these up with a little bit of meaning and what these terms mean for us beyond what we usually say about UDL, which is we need to offer lots of options. We need to, we need to offer different ways of doing things. So you might start thinking, what is the difference between vary and honor? Vary might mean choosing different things at different times, offering different options all at the same time. But honor adds something different. Honor means that there is a degree of learner agency, an important UDL concept, in that students will oftentimes make their own choices and that we as instructors can honor the choices that they make or the particular options that they need. So I just wanted to kind of enter that into the conversation right up front. As we start to talk about the difference between accessible design and retrofitting, I thought a nice prior knowledge or prior experience activation for us could be to consider this question. Can you think of a time when you or someone that you know was treated as an afterthought? What was the situation? You can use the QR code to go to Slido or open up slido.com with the number 3499321. This is anonymous, by the way. Okay, so we're going straight to academic afterthoughts. So trying to accommodate a student's sudden hearing loss on the fly during a semester, remote staffers attending department meetings, people who are on Zoom, never heard what was going on in the room or saw the images on the screen. Okay, great. So workers being treated as an afterthought because they were attending in a remote fashion. Arriving at a conference to discover that the accessible door was broken. Wow. Then discovering that the projector blocked access to the speaking area. Students with accommodation needs enrolled in a class as an afterthought when somebody was the only female in the group. People with scent allergies, because there's often scents in spaces that are unexpected from cleaning products or even perfumes and different things like that. Last minute invitation to Christmas. No accessible all gender restrooms. One person not describing the specific situation, but sharing that feelings were hurt, participation was diminished, and the situation worked, but was not optimal. Okay, so that's kind of the effective response to being treated as an afterthought. And asked to attend something virtually, but not invited to participate or were noticed as wanting to contribute. Great. Whenever people are quick to plan for food or in-person events, as someone who takes COVID precautions, it sucks when people insist on meeting in person, implied without COVID safety. Yeah, so somebody who requires or desires protections from COVID being treated as a complete afterthought. Okay, so as a couple, possibly a few more responses come in, I think this is a useful prior experience or prior knowledge activation to get into this conversation because there is a certain reality to being treated as an afterthought. And retrofitting is kind of an official, like kind of jargony way of talking about that, but it's probably an experience that everybody has either had or they've observed somebody else having of trying to attend an event or participate in something when your own needs, even if people are open to meeting them, have not been considered from the outset. Requested to ask questions virtually, but not accommodated in an online webinar. Okay, great. Yeah, so it sounds like most of these are from an academic setting, and some of them are from kind of personal settings as well. Okay, so to offer a couple of definitions of our kind of key terms that I want to explore today, accessible design, we could say, is a situation where we anticipate a variety of users, including people with disabilities. That's how I define it for the purposes of today. And this is fundamentally a proactive approach. It's something where we consider the variety of users, including people with disabilities, before and during the design stage, rather than after these users make themselves known. And retrofitting is when we plan to add or modify structures when unanticipated users make themselves known. And this is primarily a reactive approach to design. If you're familiar with the term seismic retrofitting, you actually might have a pretty good idea of what this means if you've ever lived in a place where there's earthquakes or seismic activity. Seismic retrofitting means that you have a building and you're not totally sure if it will stand up to an earthquake. And so additional structure or support is added to that building that wasn't part of the original design to see if it can help it withstand seismic activity. So now I have to give a little credit to the source of this concept when deployed in an academic context. So this comes from the book Academic Ableism, Disability in Higher Education by Jay Dolmage. Pictured on the screen on the right side is the cover of Academic Ableism. It has writing in white and red type against a black background. And Tom just put the link in the chat. Thank you, Tom. One thing I like to say about this book is it is in itself an extraordinary feat of accessibility. It is open source. The PDF that you get of it is accessible. The audiobook is free as well. And it contains certain linguistic choices that are a nod to accessibility. So, for example, in typical Chicago style, you might see of a book being referenced, see at such and such book. Instead, Jay Dolmage says access such and such book to avoid the assumption that everybody uses their eyes for reading or engagement with text. So it's really an interesting read. I highly recommend it. This was published in 2017, and it introduces 3 metaphors for how higher education deals with disability. 3 different metaphors. One is steep steps. That means the barriers that we experience in higher education, figuratively named steep steps, but they can also be metaphorical steep steps, a space that's very hard to get into that contains a ton of barriers for students with disabilities. This might be literal steep steps without an accessible entrance. It also might be onerous requirements, the lack of accommodations, lack of recognition of disability. Second metaphor is the retrofit. Retrofit is when people are open to including people with disabilities. However, systems are designed without people with disabilities in mind. And so new workarounds need to be introduced in order to get access. The third metaphor he offers is universal design, connected to universal design for learning, in which we tend to design with people with disabilities in mind. And he explains that retrofitting is the modification of a structure to add features that were not present when the structure was created. This could be a response to new or unforeseen conditions or new or unforeseen users. And so even though I'm going to suggest throughout this presentation that we want to try to avoid retrofitting and move more towards accessible design, not all conditions or users are foreseeable. Sometimes there will be situations in which you were not able to foresee. So retrofitting can be important. However, the image that we see here shows us an example. Sorry, the image on the screen shows us an example of one of the major downsides of retrofitting. This is a house that did not have an accessible entrance, and this is discussed within the book. And so the town council that kind of administrated this group of houses needed to install an accessible entrance for a girl who used a wheelchair who lived in this house. However, you can see it's an extremely convoluted and complicated set of ramps that is adds a lot of time to get into the house, is potentially dangerous based on the number of turns that somebody in a wheelchair has to use. And simply shows how much of an afterthought the idea of somebody using a wheelchair to get into this house actually was. And so while retrofitting is oftentimes necessary, Jay Dolmage suggests it often creates its own set of barriers. Academic retrofitting, we could say, is a reactive solution to inaccessibility in the academic environment. Some of you also, kind of talked about this in our first reflection question, but I'm curious, some students, I think we can say, are definitely an afterthought in our current academic system. If you'd like to share a few examples from your own experience in the chat, I would definitely appreciate that. What are some examples of students or student experiences that are an afterthought in our current academic system that you know of or have come up in your own teaching? You can use the chat for this one. Jen says neurodivergent students. I'll just wait a minute, see if there's any others, people who have ideas of students who tend to be an afterthought. Non-binary students. Yeah, I'm curious how so, but I guess what I would assume is oftentimes we don't have non-gendered restrooms. And oftentimes just in our everyday language, we will say like ladies and gentlemen or something like that, assuming that there are no non-binary students. Oh, and dorms don't always accommodate non-binary students. Susan Marie said, students who get ill during the semester or break a leg skiing and are having trouble navigating campus. Students using assistive technology. That's great. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Lillian said, a requirement for an in-person attendance for one department, but it doesn't work for a student who broke her ankle. Raina saying, I think we forget the impact of Zoom school for current undergrads and how that hurt executive functioning skills, so we're too quick to be punitive. Students who have other responsibilities outside of school assume that school is their only priority. Yeah, thank you, Mel. Just to go back to students who get ill during the semester or break a leg, I would say that that's an example of students who are an afterthought because anybody who cannot fit in with the normative time requirements of a typical academic semester are an afterthought. So anyone who has an interruption that causes them to miss a major part of the semester, I think that is a major afterthought. I saw that Deborah said students who could benefit from accommodations but don't have a formal diagnosis, students with disabilities attempting to navigate backstage spaces in a theater department. Yes, that's a big one. A lot of injuries occur for people with and without disabilities in theaters, I've noticed. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Sharon. Okay, so as you keep adding these, or maybe you scroll through and look at them, I wonder if you could come up with any generalizations about what is the problem with retrofitting in academic contexts, and what are some kind of generalizations we could make about retrofitting. Can kind of consider this on your own while I share my own. I've come up with what I think are 3 major drawbacks to retrofitting. That is the assumption that we're going to add or modify structures after the fact, after we hear of somebody with a disability or a particular need. I wrote about this in a blog post on my Substack blog that I've linked on the handout. These are my 3 major drawbacks that I like to talk about. So the first is that retrofits often compromise basic dignity. So, for example, if we don't have an accessible classroom, we might find a student with a wheelchair or a walker sitting in the back of the class, where they are separated from other students. Additionally, if a site that you want to visit only offers an accessible option on a certain day of the week, that student might not be able to even come with the class on that field trip or that activity. So might compromise basic dignity by just clearly separating the student and labeling them as not a principal member of the class. Second, retrofits require or force a disclosure of a disability a lot of the time. One example would be when electronic devices are banned in class unless a student discloses a disability. We might not want to force students to disclose that they have a particular need in order to access a learning situation. And the third is that retrofits often introduce additional time or cognitive burdens on students and on instructors. For example, waiting for transcriptions or captions to be produced, or potentially using older systems because new ones are not yet accessible. This is a fairly common thing. So here are 3 potential major drawbacks to retrofitting. So as we get into a little bit more about the law, I wanted to draw our attention to the initial roots of UDL. And this is not just this specific area of our topic today, designing options for interaction, but the entire concept of UDL. So this is a quote from one of the early columns on UDL that was in David Rose's editor's column in the Journal of Special Education Technology, and it was written by Skip Stahl and Mark Aronica, and they write, "Technology allows print textbooks to be made accessible to students with disabilities through conversion to digital form. The same material in digital form offers many options for students with disabilities. It can, for instance, be read aloud by a computer or screen reader, or printed on a braille printer. The power of future curriculum will be in these alternative digital formats. Curriculum content, activities, and related links will be able to be delivered to students in a manner that can be customized to fit their individual strengths. And while these adaptations may vary markedly depending on student needs, the flexibility of digital materials will support all of these transformations." So this was initially, this is from 2002, Tom. That is correct. So this is over 20 years ago. What's amazing to me is that this was an idea about education and including disabled students, which many have taken up. However, on a different side of the conversation is the law, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. We are about to have new rules come into effect for how the ADA is meant to be applied in public higher education in the United States. I know that doesn't apply to everybody's context here. Some may be at private institutions, but I just want to share this, Ethan. So I call it new changes and a big opportunity. When the ADA was initially passed, information was mostly not digital because the ADA was passed in the early 1990s. Making public services accessible to people with disabilities has become mostly a digital and electronic matter. So much information is available on websites and mobile apps. So a new rule was passed in 2024 that requires that digital materials be accessible to people with disabilities, and this is going to affect public institutions. That's Title II of the ADA. Title III of the ADA does not include this yet, and that usually applies to private institutions. The main requirements will be described by a framework called WCAG 2.1 AA. Maybe Tom, if you want, you can put a link to those particular guidelines. They are all a little bit beyond the scope. That is the specific way of implementing this change to make digital materials accessible to people with disabilities, including educational materials in public institutions. So why was this necessary? This is something that I have become really interested in general. Let's just go back for a second. What was the purpose and intent of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the probably most important civil rights legislation for people with disabilities, passed in the early 1990s under a Republican government and president, by the way. It's quite amazing to think that major civil rights legislation could be passed under Republican government today, but it did happen. Before the ADA was passed, it was perfectly legal in some situations to discriminate against people with disabilities. The purpose of this act was to eliminate discrimination against people with disabilities, help disabled people access employment, and make public services accessible to people with disabilities. Overall intent was rights and equality for disabled people. Okay, pretty simple, I would say. One drawback of the ADA is that it has to be tested in a certain way. There isn't a lot of enforcement of the ADA except for when disabled people encounter a violation. So there's no ADA police to call, basically. You have to actually bring a lawsuit. There's no ADA inspectors that come around and check whether you're complying. This creates a situation in which lack of accessibility persists unless challenged. This is a little bit far afield from our teaching and learning context, but one thing you might be interested in is that, there's a woman named Deborah Laufer who is something called a super tester. She visits websites to determine if required accessibility information is present on them, mainly for hotels. So she visits a lot of websites kind of with the mindset, maybe I would go on vacation here, and sees if the website itself is accessible to people with disabilities, or they're offering information about how disabled people can visit that hotel if they have the accessible rooms and things like that. Okay, so why does she do this exactly? A legal scholar named Jasmine Harris kind of explained what the problem is beyond inconvenience when people with disabilities don't get access to digital information like this. So Jasmine Harris writes, the ADA aims to eliminate barriers that stop people with disabilities from participating fully in every facet of American life. Not just the literal physical barriers, but also the social structures that foster exclusion. Such barriers remain widespread in the travel industry, and the ADA does require hotels and other travel companies to fix them when it can be done without excessive cost. Online hotel reservation services fall into the easy to fix category. It just takes a few hours work to update them. When hotels fail to do that work, people with disabilities suffer both practical and expressive harms. A disabled person need not be on the verge of a trip to suffer this harm. People with disabilities who are denied access to these services and shunted to often uninformed call centers and uncertain hold times are thus harmed by that exclusion, regardless of whether they had yet decided to make a reservation. So what Jasmine Harris is really saying here is that it is indeed a harm, not just an inconvenience, when information that is available to non-disabled people is available freely and accessibly on the web, but information that pertains to disabled people or needs to be in a format for disabled people, you have to go through a whole separate process, stay on hold on the phone, spend half your day, and potentially additional money or time off from work just to get the information that you need. Yes, indeed, that is an actual harm. Switching more specifically to digital information, there's a really wonderful article called Retrofitting Accessibility, the Legal Inequality of After-the-Fact Online Access for People with Disabilities in the United States. And I have that linked on the handout. And these writers highlight that since the advent of the World Wide Web in the mid-1990s, the race to establish equal access to information and communication technologies has grown increasingly untenable for people with disabilities, as the introduction and evolution of technologies has accelerated to the point that most new technologies introduced are obsolete before they become accessible. And so what we kind of see here is that This issue of trying to retrofit all of our materials to be accessible to people with disabilities creates a real situation of inequality. When digital materials are not able to be used by people with disabilities, that is a harm, that is a major barrier. I think this is really useful to know about. And for those of you who are going to be complying with the new rule changes to the ADA, I think it's really easy to think about this as another to-do, another area of compliance. And I think there's one other way of looking at it that could be really useful for us, which is this is an opportunity to fulfill the purpose and intent of the ADA, which is equality for people with disabilities, and the prevention of discrimination against people with disabilities. And that exists within our educational context as well. Coming back to apply this to these new terms that are popping up in the UDL 3.0 guidelines, is I like to put it that varying the options we offer our students is a way of integrating accessibility. So we're offering a lot of different options, and honoring the options that students need or choose is a way of investing in learner agency, in the ways that learners have self-determination and use their own self-knowledge to participate in the learning process. Just to summarize, I think that UDL can unite the ideas of accessibility and learner agency, which are both really important in UDL, by asking us to both vary the methods we use and honor the methods that students choose or need. So I have 3 short case studies that we can use to think about designing options for interaction and additionally varying and honoring the different methods that students need to use. So I'm just curious, you can use the chat. Off the top of your head, do you know how the following adaptive tools function in most of your common course materials? Some of them that I've been thinking about are an adaptive switch. That's a device that you can use to interact with a computer or a tablet if you can't use a keyboard or a mouse. A joystick also replaces a mouse. It's the same kind of joystick that you might use to play a computer game or a video game, but it's used to navigate on a desktop computer usually. The image that's pictured is a chin-controlled joystick. So that's for somebody who might not have the use of their arms or hands at all, but can move their head. Additionally, voice control and head control are 2 different ways of navigating a computer interface. You might use voice control to say, advance to the next tab, or a head control to do the same. You can just consider if you're familiar with any of these and how you might navigate your course materials with these. Sarah said, I know voice and head control function better than joystick and adaptive switch. That is definitely likely the case because the head control and voice control often just works with the regular tabbing system that you might use on the keyboard. If you're not familiar with these adaptive tools, I linked a page from the company called Enabling Devices that makes a lot of these different tools. You can go to that link and learn more about some of these and which kind of disabilities people may have where they need to use them, and how they work. I found this really educational. I'm beginning my journey of learning about some of these adaptive devices. It's a really great thing to learn about. One way we could potentially apply the ideas of retrofitting and accessible design here is if we're going with a retrofitting approach, we might say that we're going to plan to handle issues with assistive technologies when students make themselves known. There's a reason that this is appealing. I don't see a lot of students using assistive devices like this. That makes it easier to think about them not being very common or something that probably won't come up. However, a major barrier is going to be created when a student who does use one of these devices is entering your class. One way we could apply instead accessible design is to research and understand how adaptive tools work with your materials to the best of your ability. I've been trying to do this for Canvas and some of my course materials. It took me about 2 hours to develop what I thought was a pretty good understanding of how somebody with a joystick, an adaptive switch, and head and voice control would interact. And it's helped me a ton, and I think it was a good investment. So that I would definitely suggest that. Additionally, to advocate for purchasing or library staff to select and adopt accessible materials that are already kind of forward-facing with their accessibility. So the companies themselves are able to explain how people with these assistive devices will navigate. Case study 2. As part of our topic for today, the UDL guidelines and the considerations actually suggest that we embed flexibility in the requirements for rate, timing, speed, and range of motor action required to interact with instructional materials, physical manipulatives, and technologies. What this is really suggesting is that the rate and speed that people interact with materials varies quite a bit. I think a good way to translate this to thinking about students with certain disabilities is things may take more time than you think. I thought maybe one thought question could be, what are some differences in how quickly students with the following needs will respond to a question? What might be different about a student who has a reading-related disability, a motor disability, or a speech or communication disability? Feel free to enter something in the chat if you would like, or to just contemplate this on your own. As people are thinking about this, I've often been thinking about offering. I always try to offer questions in a text-based format, but if somebody does have a disability or a way of reading that makes them read much slower than I'm imagining, I like to oftentimes check my own biases about things. Say, okay, reading may be the thing that takes the most time. Responding might take a shorter amount of time. Sort of think about how I can factor that in as well. One other sort of activity that I had planned to consider our assumptions about the speed of interactions is a question about how long, which type of response we think might take the longest amount of time. So I have a couple of options on this poll. If you open it up using the QR code or slido.com 3499321, is which do you think takes the most time to respond to an open-ended question, such as what were your first impressions of the second chapter or chapter 2? Writing down an answer with pencil and paper, speaking an answer, typing an answer, or signing an answer. Just curious off the top of your head or first impressions, which one you think might take the longest amount of time. While people are voting, Mel wrote to the chat, thinking about whole class discussions where students don't have access to the questions ahead of time and are put on the spot, they might need time to process the question. Yeah, so talking about a waiting time between getting a question for the first time and responding. Okay, so there seems to be a clear majority of people who think that writing down an answer with pencil and paper is the thing that takes the longest, which is really quite fascinating because the way that I originally thought of this question is it'll depend on the person and what they're most familiar with doing. I think that somebody who very rarely writes with a pencil and paper will definitely find this to take the longest amount of time. Somebody who does it frequently might do it a little bit faster. Tom says ASL signing is much quicker than English handwriting if you are a fluent signer. I would say that might be some, but yes, it does often occur more quickly. Okay, this was kind of a just for fun. And Trail, I agree, it definitely does depend. One of the ways I was thinking that we could kind of think about this is that the retrofitting approach would be, I think, to use your own assumptions and experience about which activities might be quick. So, yeah, I hear people say all the time, a quick warm up or pop quizzes, and then just let students request extra time if they need it. The way I think about accessible design in this situation is to hopefully plan for the longest amount of time it could take for students to participate in an activity. If time is truly limited, consider offering options in which students choose which will be fastest for them. To the extent that that is also perceptible by the other students. I'm not saying that this is uncomplicated. It's quite complex, but this is acknowledging that this is a way that we could use the concepts of retrofitting and accessible design to think about these classroom dynamics. Catherine said, it might also be worth considering the quality of the response, our ability to interpret it, in addition to the time it takes the person to respond. Indeed, and that's not to also exclude the possibility of the instructor themselves having a disability or a need related to the perception of information. Okay, our last case study is with regard to flexibility in the space and environment. I think this is a particularly interesting one because the UDL guidelines do ask us to build in flexibility with the environment and various sensory elements of it. So sound and light sensitivity is something that's quite common for neurodivergent students. That's something that affects me personally. My mom's actually deaf in one ear and hard of hearing in another ear, and I can barely interpret the volume of my voice, and it's often very, very, very quiet. So it's very hard for us to speak face to face. I always think of that example. But also the need for specific or additional lighting or sound amplification is a quite common need in learning situations as well. It's common for students with vision or hearing related disabilities. So given this range of needs, what does it look like to offer options for lighting and sound? And what does it look like to vary and honor different methods for interacting with sound or light? It's a little bit of a rhetorical question in that it's quite complicated. But if you do have a specific idea right now, you could enter it into the chat. One of the concepts I use to deal with such complex classroom situations is that of access friction. I like to say it's something that we've all experienced, but maybe not had a word for. And it's a phenomenon in which people have different and potentially conflicting access needs. One person may be incredibly sensitive to light and sound. One person may need additional lighting or amplification of sound. More generally, this could be an acknowledgement that working towards access may and often involve some friction or some conflict that we actually do have to negotiate and navigate. If you want to learn more about access friction, I have one of my own posts where I've described this concept in detail, linked on the handout. Sarah's saying, I make it clear in my classes and workshops that participants can wear earplugs and sunglasses. Okay, you've already come to the conclusion that I was going to. So here, instead of going with the concepts of accessible design and retrofitting, I want to at least enter into the conversation that there might be more slippage between accessible design and retrofitting when access friction comes into play. We may not be able to proactively design for every single need. And that's why I think the concept of access friction can be really helpful for us. Instead, we might come up with the following ways to both vary and honor the options that our students might want. So to vary, we could note areas of the room that are near and far from light and sound elements, so people can, to the extent they can, move to a specific area of the room, or offer links to accessible versions of materials so that they can put it on their own screen and use sound and light as appropriate. Honoring also is going to be really important here. I oftentimes see that instructors become frustrated when a student takes an action to mitigate the sensory environment because they feel like it's the student not being part of the group or doing something unexpected or disruptive. But if we were going to try to honor student choices, that might look like honoring student seating choices to be near or far from sound elements, honoring student choice to wear ear coverings or glasses, and honoring student decisions to view materials on their own device, if that is, especially if that's something they're using to mitigate the effects of the sound and light that are part of the materials. So, concluding thought before we go to just general questions and conversations. I hope that one of the takeaways you can take from this workshop and this presentation is that there are a number of benefits to accessible design or a proactive approach, and a number of downsides to retrofitting or a reactive approach. UDL is clearly part of the accessible design category, the proactive approach, and that we can actually see a lot of connections between the origins and original purpose and intent of UDL and the origins and original purpose and intent of the ADA, and especially a connection with the new digital accessibility rules in the ADA, and that hopefully the concepts of accessible design and retrofitting, and also different ways of varying and honoring options that we provide and offer to our students can also be helpful concepts for navigating this. So if you would like to stay in touch, here's the contact information. It's on the last slide of the slide deck, and that QR code goes to my newsletter if that's something that you would like to check out as well. And that's all that we have as far as formal content, and I'd be happy to have a question and answer. This would be a great time to turn on your mic if that's a way that you would like to participate.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Please feel free to unmute, or it's hard to see everybody right now in the Zoom room, but feel free to either write a question in the chat or unmute and ask Sarah any questions about her wonderful presentation. Compliments in the chat, Sarah. People appreciate what you had to share. So feel free. If people have comments they would like to share. We have some time for that. We have about 4 more minutes.
Also feel free to email me any questions or comments after. I'll just put my email in the...
Yes.
So that's not...
And if you haven't visited her website, there's lots of great information there. And also subscribe to her Substack for some great reads. All right, so it looks like people are dropping out, Sarah. So again, I want to just thank you so much. People are jumping off because they have the next meeting, the next commitment. So thank you so much. We really appreciate, as always, we're so grateful, I can say this, to have you at Goodwin and teaching in our human service program. We are just wonderful to have firsthand contact with you and to have you working with our students. So we really appreciate you, appreciate what you had to share. And by all accounts, all the thank yous coming in, everyone enjoyed your presentation. So Sarah, once again, we're grateful for your contributions.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody.